This episode of the GSL Local Business Spotlight is brought to you by Senior Care Authority, Central Ohio East. If you're trying to figure out senior care for a parent or loved one, you don't have to navigate it alone. Senior Care Authority, Central Ohio East helps families understand assisted living, memory care, elder care options, and the next steps that make sense for their situation. Brandon Boyd provides personalized, local guidance designed to bring clarity to a process that can feel overwhelming. Call Senior Care Authority, Central Ohio East today at 614-407-6459 or visit seniorcareauthority.com/locations/central-ohio-east to schedule your free consultation. And Stansberry Media and Strategy. If your business is posting content but still struggling to turn attention into actual growth, the problem may not be your effort. It may be your strategy. Stansberry Media and Strategy helps entrepreneurs and small businesses strengthen their positioning, messaging, content, and marketing systems so their brand gets seen, remembered, and chosen. If you're ready to stop guessing and start building with a clear plan, connect with Tiffany Stansberry and Stansberry Media and Strategy on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn today. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the GSL Local Business Spotlight. I'm Robert Rippey, founder and CEO of GSL Media LLC here in Columbus, Ohio, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 7 of the GSL Local Business Spotlight. Today, we have a very special guest here. I'd like to introduce Jason Chen from HealthCarePOA LLC. This is a business that he has started and brought him onto the podcast to talk about his life, his experiences, and his particular business. So welcome to the podcast, Jason.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's get right down to it. Before we get into HealthCarePOA, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, so I'm actually a philosopher by training. I have a PhD in philosophy, and my specialty is medical ethics. So I used to be the clinical bioethics fellow at Ohio State Wexner Medical Center. And basically what that means is that I was addressing ethical issues that arose at the bedside. And then I worked as a patient advocate at the James. And then I started a postdoc position at the College of Pharmacy at Ohio State, where I teach medical ethics. I'm also a senior lecturer in medical ethics at the University of Akron. I'm a certified healthcare ethics consultant, and I'm also an advisory member of the OZU Ethics Committee.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. So that's a lot of different things there. So how exactly did that career path develop?
Yeah, well, it started at the hospital. So when you do clinical ethics consults at the hospital, a lot of the times the issues that come up have to deal with who has the authority to make medical decisions. So often people don't have anybody, and so we're trying to figure out like what to do in those situations, or they have multiple family members who are arguing and disagreeing over what to do, and so we have to kind of resolve those conflicts.
Okay.
And so it was at that time that I thought to myself, somebody should do this professionally, right? Because sometimes people don't have any family at all, or they just don't have family to rely on. But I didn't pursue it back then because I was busy with other stuff. So I only relatively recently started my business.
Okay. Gotcha. So you touched on this just a little bit. Let's get a little bit more into this. Most people probably assume that if something happens to them and they can't make their own medical decisions, their spouse, children, another family member will step in. But what happens when you don't have someone who can fill that role?
Yeah. So if you really don't have anybody to fill that role, what's going to happen is that the hospital is going to apply for guardianship. And that guardian is going to be a stranger that's appointed by the court. right? So you're going to have a complete stranger make medical decisions for you. And the
Okay.
reason why that happens is because somebody has to make decisions for you, right? If you can't make them for yourself, somebody has to do it. And the
Right.
hospital doesn't want to do it. So they're going to find somebody else to do it. And typically that's going to be a guardian.
Okay. Let's see. So let's make this real here. So let's say that I'm single and I don't have children, and tomorrow I get seriously injured and become unavailable to communicate. I haven't designated anyone to make health care decisions for me. What happens then?
Yeah. So, I mean, do you truly not have anybody in this scenario? Like you don't even have like cousins or anything?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so if you're completely alone and you have not executed a healthcare power of attorney, then you're going to get a guardian.
Okay.
That's right.
So what exactly happens in that process for this particular scenario?
So it's going to depend on the details. If the situation is emergent, like for instance, maybe you need to have this surgery right now, or else you're going to die. In that case, the hospital is just going to act in your best interest and save your life. Right?
Okay.
But if it's not an emergent situation, but you're going to require these decisions to be made in the future, the hospital is going to apply for guardianship.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's kind of lead this into how you started your business. So, at what point did all of this experience that you had before with OSU lead you to realize that there was a problem? And I know that you touched on this a little bit before, but if you can get a little bit more into depth into this, that eventually became healthcare POA.
Yeah. So I mentioned a couple of times, right, that if you don't have anybody, then you're going to get appointed a guardian, and it's going to be a
Right.
complete stranger. The reason why you don't want that to happen is because that guardian is not going to know your wishes and values, right,
Sure.
as expressed by you while you still had capacity, right? Because by that point, you've already been deemed incompetent by the court, you know.
Okay.
And for most people, we want to have say, we want to decide what happens to our bodies, right?
Right.
Some people, they have specific religious or spiritual beliefs that are going to inform their medical wishes, right? Other people are just for some other reason have certain values that are not going to be shared by other people. Well, you want somebody at, ideally at the bedside, who can advocate for you and who can make those decisions accordingly, right? The guardian's not going to be able to do that,
Right.
again, as expressed by you while you still had capacity, right? So the idea is that we want to avoid guardianship, right? If I can find these people who still have decision making capacity, right, then I can sit down with them and then I can ask them a series of questions regarding their wishes and values. Then I can document it. I can have them sign it, right, and then I can just keep that document. I'll store it in some HIPAA compliant platform,
Okay.
so that way we can avoid guardianship. Like, these people will have somebody who knows their wishes and values and who can therefore make medical decisions on behalf of them according to those values.
Okay. Now, for the people that don't know what HIPAA is and they don't understand medical rules and regulations, could you explain what HIPAA is real quick?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically it basically restricts how medical information can be shared, right? So if something is like HIPAA compliant, it just means that it's extra secure because
Right.
medical information is generally protected.
Right. Okay. Okay. So, do you have a target demographic for your particular business and what you offer?
Yeah. So the target demographic is solo agers. So these are people who are living their senior years by themselves. Perhaps they've never been married, or their spouses have died, and they either don't have children or they're perhaps estranged from their children. So these are people who really just don't have anybody. Like, these people should seriously consider hiring me to be their healthcare POA agent.
Okay.
Yeah, but there's another reason to hire me too. So if you look at the healthcare POA, like the document, right, it allows you to name three people. It allows you to name an agent, your first alternate, and then a second alternate, right? So if something happens to you, and somebody needs to make decisions for you. The hospital is going to call the agent first. That's the first person that's listed. If that person is unavailable, they'll call the first alternate and then the second alternate. Okay.
Okay.
So people can also hire me to be a backup agent to serve as the first or second alternate. And the reason why that's a good idea is because, a lot of times people don't answer the phone. They're just not available for whatever reason, right? Maybe an emergency happens in the middle of the night and the person doesn't have their phone on because they're asleep. Right? If you hire me, I'll be on call for you 24/7.
I'm sure that would be a really great thing for people. It would give them a lot more um surety in knowing that their situation is handled and that someone will be by the phone or at least by email anyway to be able to handle anything that happens to
Yeah, that's right.
them.
Also, another benefit is that one, I'm familiar with the medical system. I have pretty good medical literacy. I'm
Okay.
not an MD, I'm not a medical doctor, but I have pretty good medical literacy.
Right.
Probably better than whoever their family member is. Right. I've I have a lot of experience dealing with complicated medical decision making scenarios.
Okay.
So I don't tend to panic in those situations. I'm pretty calm. Um, so there are a number of reasons why you would want to hire someone like me to be either the agent or your first or second alternate. The other issue is that I'm typically younger than the person who would hire me, younger and healthier, right? And that's important because you want your healthcare POA agent to be able to make decisions for you when you get sick or injured, right? So sometimes spouses will have each other as the agent, but the spouses are equally old and they have their own health issues, right? Or the spouses are traveling together and they get into a car accident together.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, can someone have relatives and still effectively be a solo ager, or is that even possible?
I mean, it depends on how you define it. I've seen it defined a couple of different ways. Some people define it more loosely so that, yes, technically you could be a solo ager and still have relatives, but they're just not around to help you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I've seen other more stricter definitions. I would say that, yeah, you would not count as a solo ager in that case. But I mean, however we define it, it's not that important, right? The most important thing is, do you have somebody to pick up the phone and to advocate for you at the hospital when the time comes?
Right. Right. Are you seeing this become more common, seeing more solo agers coming up as far as time passing and things? The reason why I ask is because the baby boomer population, for instance, they are pretty much in senior age now. And I imagine with that particular demographic, you would think that would become more common, right?
Yep. Yep. And solo agers are on the rise because of the baby boomers. You're exactly right.
All right. Okay. So when most people hear healthcare power of attorney, they probably think that you're talking about a legal document, but your work involves actually serving as this person's entrusted with making healthcare decisions. Can you explain that distinction for the viewers and listeners, please?
Yeah, I think when a lot of people say healthcare POA or healthcare power of attorney, they mean the person. And that's technically not correct. The healthcare power of attorney is the document. The person that you name in the document is your agent. So to be clear, I say that I'm a professional healthcare power of attorney agent.
Okay. All right. So, what exactly does a healthcare power of attorney agent do? A professional one.
Yeah. So, well, a professional healthcare power of attorney agent does what every surrogate decision maker should do. Okay. So the first thing is to know the wishes and values of the client or the patient,
Okay.
right? Because the first job of any surrogate decision maker is to use what's called substituted judgment, right? That's a technical term. And
Okay.
substituted judgment means that you're supposed to tell the medical team what the patient would want if the patient had decision making capacity. Now, if you don't know what the patient would want, which is very, very often the case, the surrogate decision maker is supposed to make whatever decision is in the patient's best interest. So the first standard is substituted judgment. The second is the best interest standard.
Okay. So, when does your authority begin? if
My
somebody
auth-
wanted to hire you?
yeah, so my authority in any, healthcare POA agent's authority begins when the patient is deemed to lack decision-making capacity. Anytime the patient lacks decision-making capacity, the surrogate decision maker, any surrogate decision maker, would have the authority to make medical decisions on behalf of the patient. And your decision-making capacity is typically assessed by a physician. They'll ask you specific questions about how well you understand what's going on and whether or not you appreciate the situation. They'll ask you about why you're consenting or declining this recommended treatment, right? They'll ask you a series of questions to assess it.
Okay. So when does your authority end?
Yeah, so my authority ends uh, when the patient dies, right? But they can also revoke their healthcare POA. You can revoke your healthcare POA at any time. So if they were to revoke it, then my authority would end whenever they revoke it. Otherwise, it ends at their death.
Okay. Okay. So what exactly decisions can you make for said person?
Uh, me- Pretty much all medical decisions. So there's also a living will, right? A living will is a document that outlines your specific wishes and basically an end of life scenario, right?
Okay.
So you can give your doctor permission to withhold withdrawal artificially, uh, artificially administered nutrition and hydration, for instance. Not everybody has a living will. You don't necessarily have to have one. Um, if they were to hire me, they don't have to have a living will. But
Okay.
yeah, you could have a living will to state explicitly what you want or do not want in these end of life scenarios. In which case, I would just follow those wishes. Right.
Okay.
Otherwise, I would have the authority to make pretty much every other medical decision.
Okay. In your professional opinion, and for potential customers that might be listening to you and becoming intrigued by this, would you recommend them having a living will just in case?
So I would say, I, I mean, it just depends on maybe like I think it just depends on their level of trust in
Okay.
me. Okay.
Okay.
Because I'm not going to override their living will and I can't override their, well, basically, I can't override their living will. So if there's like an element of them that that doesn't trust that I will honor exactly what they're going to want at the end of life situation, then I would recommend filling that out. Otherwise, I would say that you shouldn't fill it out because there may be, specific weird situations that come up that you didn't foresee, right? That may inform a different decision that you would make. So this is one of the benefits of having somebody who knows you and your values, right? Because medical situations are unique.
Sure.
So when people try to think about what they want in the future, they have a really hard time. And what they basically do is kind of think about maybe different medical scenarios that they've encountered in their lives, either in real life or maybe on TV. Right?
Okay.
They'll think about this one episode of Grey's Anatomy that they watched, and then they'll say, they'll make a passing comment to their son, like, "Oh, I would never want to be, attached to a ventilator or something like that." You know, but then, what if they need a ventilator, but they only need to be on it for a couple of weeks, and then they can return to their baseline,
Okay.
right? That's a possible scenario, right? So there are these very unique situations that people can't really predict, and so that's why your healthcare POA agent or any surrogate decision maker should know your values, because that is what's going to inform what decision you would make.
Okay. Really quickly, what decisions can't you make for a potential client?
Yeah, so the financial ones.
Okay.
So there's a financial POA and a healthcare POA. Those are two distinct legal documents. The
Okay.
financial POA gives someone the authority to handle all of your financial matters. I can't, I don't do that. So I don't touch any of that stuff. I
Okay.
only handle medical decisions. I don't do funeral arrangements. So that happens after, because if the, or like, and like body disposition stuff. So basically, I don't have the authority to make any decisions regarding your body after you die.
Okay. So, how is what you do different from an attorney practicing law in
Yeah,
this
so
particular?
attorneys typically don't serve as the POA agent, right?
Okay.
They'll help you execute the healthcare POA, like the document itself. Sometimes estate planning attorneys will be asked by their clients if they can serve as their agent because some of their clients don't have anybody that they trust. And as far as I can tell, the attorneys typically aren't comfortable with doing that. That's what the attorneys tell me anyway.
Sure.
So if there are any estate planning attorneys listening, I would be a really good resource for you.
And I'm sure that's something also good for potential clients as well, because I would imagine if it were me in that scenario, that my first thought would necessarily be an attorney, not necessarily a healthcare POA agent, and I think that's what's good about your particular business and the service that your business offers.
Yeah. And the difficult part of my business model is that it's relatively new. So
Yeah.
people don't even know that it exists. Like I recently met this financial planner and yeah, I told him what I did and he just said, "Oh, wow, I never even heard of that." But I have all these clients who would benefit from this service. I haven't even thought of like a POA agent on the healthcare side, you
Sure.
know? And so the professionals don't even know that I exist. So their clients definitely don't know that I exist.
And that's a good thing, just being able to create more visibility around this particular business model, because I think it is something that provides an immediate need for an immediate demographic.
Yes.
All right, so why would somebody hire a professional healthcare POA agent instead of naming a friend, sibling, niece, nephew, or another person they know?
Yeah. So I mean, the one really sad reason is because they just don't trust them. You know,
Right.
maybe there was some bad family history for whatever reason. That happens all the time. I've seen it at the hospital.
Okay.
And so they wouldn't just name their distant relative or some other relative. Another is that maybe they just don't want to burden them. you know like, oh, my nephew, he's whatever, he's doing his thing, he has his own life, I don't want to be a burden, right? He has like 3 kids. Or oh, they live in California and like I just don't want them to have to do anything because they're so far away. They probably won't help out because they're too busy, right? And from the other side, it might be the case that the family just doesn't want to do it, right?
Sure.
You talk to your nephew, and the nephew's like, "Nah, I don't want to do that. I'm just too busy. I don't want that responsibility." Some people, they don't like the idea of having that authority, you know, because sometimes they're going to have to make end of life decisions, right?
Sure.
Like, not everyone's comfortable with letting mom die because maybe in their mind they're killing mom or something like that. So
Right.
that would those are all reasons to hire someone like me. Another is that they may not be familiar with the medical system. They may have low medical literacy. They just don't understand what's going on, right? Maybe they don't act calmly under pressure. Maybe they tend to panic and they can't deal with those type of situations. Another reason is that maybe they're just not reliable or responsible, right? One
Right.
issue that we face at the hospital is that we call the surrogate decision maker and they don't pick up the phone,
Okay.
and we leave a message and they don't call back, right? We schedule a goals of care meeting at the hospital and they don't show up, or maybe they show up drunk, you know? So it carries a lot of responsibility to be the surrogate decision maker. So you want someone who takes it seriously, who can do it well, and knows your wishes and values.
Okay. Are there circumstances where you would actually tell someone you don't need my service? You already have an appropriate person in your life who can do this?
Yeah, absolutely. So if they already have close family and their family knows them well and they're reliable and yeah, and they have an agent, maybe a first alternate and even a second alternate, they don't need me.
Okay. So, your background is unusual for an entrepreneur. You have a PhD in philosophy, you've worked in bioethics and patient advocacy, and you're a certified healthcare ethics consultant. How exactly does that background affect the way you approach this responsibility?
Yeah, so I think a lot about medical ethics. And so when I was coming up with this business idea, I put a lot of effort into figuring out what the most ethical way of doing it was, you know? And a lot of it, had to come down to what the procedure would be, what the compensation model would be, right? To see if
Okay.
there was like potential conflicts of interest here or there. And so I put in a lot of effort into this, so much so that I'm currently writing the code of ethics that hopefully will set the standard moving forward. Because right now it's not regulated, right? Like this profession is new. There's no certification, right? There's no national license for this, right? So it's
Sure.
kind of the wild, wild west. Anybody can just kind of market themselves to be a professional healthcare POA agent. You know, what I think eventually is going to happen is that there's going to be a national association of healthcare POA agents, and there's going to be a certification similar to what we have for guardians
Okay.
and independent patient advocates. So I think that's where it's going to go. But yeah, so a lot of my ethics background goes into formulating what I consider to be like the ethical conduct for people in this position.
Okay. There's an extraordinary amount of trust involved here. Someone is essentially telling you, if there comes a day where I can't speak for myself, I'm trusting you to speak for me. How do you develop enough understanding of that person beforehand to know what they would actually want?
Yeah. So there are a number of resources on the internet that help you facilitate these conversations. The one that I base my questions off of is called the Conversation Project. They have a
Okay.
number of like booklets. And yeah, they just ask the important questions, you know. So one of them being, you know, do you prioritize quality over quantity of life, right?
Okay.
What does quality of life look like? You know, what's important to you? You know, stuff like that. What are you most afraid of? What are your religious and spiritual beliefs? How would they affect, you know, medical decision making, right? If you're a Jehovah's Witness, obviously you're going to refuse blood products.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me give you an objection somebody listening or watching might have. I'd rather have somebody who loves me making those decisions than somebody I'm paying. What would you say to that person?
Yeah, I think that's perfectly reasonable because the assumption is the person who you love is close to you and they probably know you as a human being, and that's exactly what you want. And I would say for most people who have close people who are supportive and responsible, they wouldn't need somebody like me. But there may be certain situations where they would benefit from having me at least as a backup. So, for instance, oftentimes families don't honor the patient's wishes because they just can't let go, right?
Okay.
Many people prioritize quality over quantity of life. But the families, even though they know that, they just feel this sense of obligation and duty to keep the person alive for whatever reason, right? It could
Okay.
be guilt, right? It could be for religious reasons too. You know, some people say, you know, we're waiting for God to perform a miracle. So the assumption is that the longer the patient is alive, the more likely it is for God to perform a miracle, right? You encounter this all the time at the hospital, you
Sure.
know? So it happened in my own family too. My maternal grandmother, she had stomach cancer, and at the end of her life, you know, there was a surgery that, you know, could have extended her life for a couple of months or so. And my mom knew that my grandma would not want that surgery, so my mom was against it. My aunt disagreed. She said, "No, we have to do everything that we can to extend her life." And then my uncle abstained. He didn't want to participate in the discussion. So now you have a tie,
Yeah.
right? You have one daughter in favor, one daughter against. You never want to have a tie. That just makes everything so much more complicated. Okay. So you have these situations where, you know, families will disagree and they're then even though they know what the patient would want, they say, no, we just can't let her go. We got to keep her alive. God is going to save her, or at least they're hoping.
Okay. Gotcha. And I want to get back to this point really quick, but I wanted to ask a really quick question to see if you can enlighten the listeners and viewers of this. You touched on quality of life versus quantity of life. Can you distinguish those two for the listeners and viewers, real quick, please?
Yeah, I think for most people, quality of life refers to a state, a minimum, a state of being conscious, being able to communicate with others,
Okay.
right? So, whereas, you know, a lot of people, you know, we can just keep you alive on machines, but you're just unconscious the whole time, right? So you're technically living longer, right? But a lot of people would say that that is not really a good quality of life because you're not experiencing anything. You can't communicate with your family. You know, you're not petting your dog or whatever it is that brings meaning to your life.
Sure. Okay. Can there actually be an advantage to having someone who isn't experiencing the same emotional pressure that a family member might be experiencing during a medical crisis?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's another way of asking, like, what would be the benefit of hiring me versus just using a family member? Well, because I can be objective when honoring your wishes, right? I mean, I would say one of the most tragic and traumatic situations is when you lose a loved one. It's very hard for me to think of something that's more traumatic than that. So for family members, it's an emotionally like laden situation, right? Emotions are running high. Whereas it won't necessarily do that for me. I mean, obviously, I'm going to feel bad for you because you're in this like medical situation, but generally speaking, I can react objectively and make wishes according to your values.
Okay. Okay. So we've talked about this a little bit. I kind of want to touch on this a little bit more in depth. Who is the person listening to this conversation right now who should seriously start thinking about who will make healthcare decisions for them?
Anybody who is getting older and anybody who is experiencing health problems, they should anybody in those two groups should think about who the surrogate decision maker is going to be. So Ohio, they have a hierarchy with a descending order of priority for surrogate decision makers. Okay. The first person is going to be your spouse. Okay. The next is going to be your adult child, or if you have multiple adult children, the majority of the children. Then it goes to your parents. Then it goes to your siblings, right? And then it goes to the nearest blood or adoptive relative. Okay.
Okay.
So that's the hierarchy that's used. Typically in like all medical scenarios, like in the law, it's only about end of life scenarios, but hospitals, as far as I know, tend to use that hierarchy for other medical decision making scenarios as well. Okay. So if you're aging or if you're experiencing health problems, think about that list. Are you married? Okay. Maybe you're technically still married, but you're estranged from your spouse and you don't want them to make medical decisions for you. If that's the case, well, then you better execute a healthcare power of attorney and name somebody else.
Sure.
Maybe you want your son to make decisions, right? So name your son as your POA agent, and then your son will trump your estranged spouse, stuff like that. So that's the way to think about it.
Okay. Is this something people tend to think about much too late?
Yes.
When should somebody actually start beginning to plan for this?
Now, pretty
Okay.
much now. I mean, if you're interested in the topic, you should plan now, right? A teenager obviously isn't going to care much about that, and they don't have really much use for this. I'm talking about like older adults, even like people who are like 21. Like you might. I mean, I think it's always better to execute a healthcare POA because you can always name somebody, right? So, for instance, let's say you're 21, right?
Okay.
You don't have adult kids, right? You're too young. So that means and you may or may not be married. Most 21-year-olds are not married. So what that means is that it's going to be your parents making medical decisions for you. Well, maybe you don't get along with your parents. Maybe you're estranged from them, right? Or maybe you're estranged from one, but not the other. If you have parents and and you like one but not the other and they disagree, well, there you go, you have like another tie that you want to avoid. Anytime where you have like multiple people who have the same level of authority to make decisions for you, there can be a tie,
Okay.
right? So you want to avoid that. So there's a reason for a 21-year-old to name maybe one of the parents as the healthcare POA agent, right? But typically I think the demographic that should think about it more are the ones who are going to experience more health problems sooner rather than later, and that's typically going to be older people.
Okay. Okay. What are some of the biggest misconceptions or mistakes you see people make when planning or failing to plan for who will make their medical decisions?
Yeah, they don't have conversations with whoever they chose about their wishes and values. There's so many people who have no idea what their mom or dad would want, and so they can't use substituted judgment, right? Which is the first duty of any surrogate decision maker. So that means they have to rely on the best interest standard. So they have to determine whether this or that is in the patient's best interest. Okay. Well, there's no universally accepted notion of well-being. There's no universally accepted concept of best interest, right? So, for instance, um, there was a patient that I did a consult on. I don't remember what happened to him, but he was basically in some sort of permanent unconscious state. Okay.
Okay.
He was not expected to wake up, and he was intubated, right? So he was connected to the ventilator, and then like went in his mouth. And a couple weeks had passed, and they were deciding whether or not to trach and peg him, right, or to let him die. So trach and peg is a trach is like was when they make the incision in your neck, and that is where they connect you to the ventilator. So instead of going through your mouth, the tube goes into your neck. Okay,
Okay.
it's called a trach. A peg is a peg tube, and that's like a feeding tube that goes directly into your belly. Okay. Those are long-term decisions, right? So if your goal is to keep the patient alive long-term, then you trach and peg the patient, right? But, do we do that, or do we extubate and then, let the patient die? And the son was the only legal next of kin. So he was the surrogate decision maker. And he had not had conversations with his dad about this situation. And so he said, I want whatever leads to less suffering, which is a very reasonable position to have, right?
Sure.
Okay, but what does that mean? Does that mean we trach and peg the patient, or do we let him die? It's not clear,
Right. I see how that
right?
could be very ambiguous.
Yeah. And different members of the medical team had different opinions on it, you know? So there's no universally accepted, concept of well-being. So you want to avoid your surrogate decision makers having to rely on using the best interest standard. You want them to be able to use substituted judgment, but that requires you sharing your wishes and values with them. That is the most important thing.
Okay. So let's talk about how your particular business, Healthcare POA LLC, works. So let's say somebody listening has just had this realization: I don't actually have anyone I feel comfortable putting this responsibility on. What does working with Healthcare POA look like?
Yeah, so if they, there's a free consultation, so they can ask questions about what my services are, and my background.
Okay.
If they choose to hire me, I'll sit down with them and have an in-depth values conversation. I have a list of questions that I will use. I will document their wishes and values. I'll then have them sign it, and then I'll upload it into my platform, and then I'll also upload any and all other advanced care planning documents to the same system. So I basically become the contact person for all things surrogate decision making. And then I'm on call for them 24/7. So whenever the situation arises where they don't have decision making capacity, I'm there to make medical decisions on their behalf.
Okay.
Oh, also, I will share their values document with the medical team. That's a way to keep my feet to the fire.
Okay. Yeah, that's very important. It's very important. Okay, so let's run a scenario here. Let's say that I'm a solo ager and I happen to see Healthcare POA LLC and I am interested in a free consultation and I contact you. So, what exactly would that first conversation look like?
Yeah, well, a lot of it's just going to depend on what questions that you have. I'm really there just to answer your questions. And the reason why that I have it like that is because it's a relatively new business, right? People have never heard of it before. And so they're going to have questions about what I do, what my responsibilities are, what I'm not going to do, you know? So for instance, I'm not a care manager, right? So I don't coordinate your healthcare appointments. I'm not picking up your prescriptions from CVS. That's someone else. I'm also not a patient advocate. I'm not going I'm not serving you while you still have decision making capacity, right? That's what patient advocates do. Patient advocates, they'll go with you to doctor's appointments and they'll help explain the medical diagnosis and the medical situation to you. A lot of them have medical backgrounds, so like nurses, right?
Okay.
But you still have decision making capacity when you're working with a patient advocate. I come in when you lack decision making capacity.
Okay. Okay.
So that's something that people need to understand.
Sure.
Also, I explain my compensation model. Currently, my prices are, there's a $300 setup fee, and that includes the in-depth values conversation, and then it's $50 per month. So it's
Okay.
essentially a subscription model. Right? If the case is really complicated and it requires a lot of my time, then I have the option of charging $150 per hour.
Okay.
But I just started my business, so the prices are relatively low, and so if there's an increase of demand for my services, I'll slowly increase my prices too.
Sure, sure. So you happen to mention how you're essentially on call 24/7. So I'm assuming this is an ongoing relationship just in case they happen to need to contact you and or you need to contact them as far as some sort of change that needs to happen.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. Again, if they don't revoke their healthcare POA, I am their agent for life.
Okay.
Yeah. And so there going to be regular check-ins, like my clients have to, I tell them, like if something changes, if something important changes, like specifically maybe like your medical wishes or your values, like you have to let me know, and I'm very responsive, you can text me, you can email me, you can call me. I'm always in front of a screen.
Okay. Okay. How frequently do you revisit your patients' wishes?
Yeah, so I don't have a set um, I don't have a set schedule for every client. It's going to depend on the particular situation. So, for instance, I'm not going to do it annually for everybody because not everybody has a year to live. You
Sure.
know what I mean? So that's going to be specific to the client.
Okay. Okay. So what happens if their health or circumstances change?
Yeah. So one, they have to let me know.
Okay.
That's like anything that could affect how I perform my job in the future. Like I tell them, like you got to let me know because I'm going to do the best job I can. You know. But obviously, if it's really bad, then they lack decision making capacity. Then I would get called by the hospital, and
Right.
I would find out that way.
Okay. What do you wish more people understood about professional healthcare POA services that they simply don't know today?
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing that they should know is that they exist, right? Vast majority of people don't know what they are. I would say most people don't even understand what a healthcare power of attorney is, right? Just like what the legal document means and what the authority the agent has. So, for instance, some people think that if you execute a healthcare POA, your healthcare POA agent immediately has authority over you. That's not necessarily true, right? For most people, that's not true. Their authority begins only when you lack decision making capacity, right? And decision making capacity often waxes and wanes, right? You could have it one day and not another. So the authority that the agent has also waxes and wanes, right? You could have decision making capacity in the morning, but then lack it in the evening. You know, you could have the capacity to make one decision, but not another decision, right? It depends on the complexity of the decision. It depends on the risk benefit ratio of the decision. So most people don't really have that understanding. I would say a lot of doctors actually don't have that understanding of like the nuances of decision making capacity. One of my roles as the clinical bioethics fellow was to educate doctors about that.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. So let's switch gears here. You're not only working in a relatively new professional field, you're also trying to build a business around something many people don't know even exists. What's been the hardest part of building Healthcare POA LLC?
Finding clients,
Okay.
definitely the hardest part. I've given multiple talks at senior centers, and maybe a handful of people show up. I don't think any of those talks led to any clients. I've been trying to network with other professionals who work with seniors and maybe may encounter solo agers. So, estate planning attorneys, financial planners, those people.
Okay.
Most estate planning attorneys don't tend to respond to my calls and messages. I'm not entirely sure why, but yeah, that's been the biggest challenge by far.
Okay. Okay. What surprised you most about entrepreneurship so far?
I didn't expect that I would be so interested in building my business.
Okay.
I didn't expect that. But I work on it all the time. I'm constantly thinking about it. It's almost like an obsession of mine now. Like it's an avenue where I can kind of like exercise my OCD, or I can let my OCD kind of like let loose. For instance, I design my own website, I design my own logo. And I've spent so many hours tinkering with like the colors and the layout, and yeah, I really enjoy it. Like I don't even feel like I can enjoy doing other things as much until I'm done working on the business.
Sure. Sure. I totally get that. Totally get that. So, to kind of carry on to that thought right there, what keeps you motivated to continue building this business?
I think the need is there. I believe the need is there because I've seen it at the hospital, and it's been reconfirmed by the professionals who I have encountered. Right? I say this is what I do, and they say, "Oh, wow, I've never heard of that before. That makes total sense." I have clients who need someone like you. So that's what keeps me going.
Okay. All right. If someone listening recognizes themselves in what we've talked about today, but they don't know where to begin, what's the first thing you would recommend them do?
If they're interested in, you mean the people who are interested in hiring me or
Yes.
considering hiring me, they should
Yes.
check out my website, which is HealthCarePOA, as in power of attorney, healthcarepoa.net.
Okay. Okay. So, other than your website, where else can they learn more about you and how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I have a LinkedIn profile. I don't know if most people have LinkedIn profiles, but I'm on there. I'm also on Facebook. I have a Facebook page for running a business. So if you just look up Healthcare POA LLC, you'll find that.
Okay. Okay, so before we wrap up, is there anything that we didn't cover today that you would like the listeners and the viewers to know that you feel is very important?
Let me think about it. I think we've covered the most important things. Uh, I am currently working on an educational booklet about healthcare POAs and what you need to know about healthcare POAs, and that I think will contain basically the most important information that people should know. We've covered the vast majority of that. I don't know if there's anything else that people that we haven't discussed that people should know about. Yeah, the agent doesn't have authority unless the patient is deemed to lack decision-making capacity. Okay.
Hmm.
Capacity can fluctuate. It often fluctuates, waxes and wanes. So the corresponding authority of the agent often waxes and wanes. That's important. There's a distinction between healthcare POAs and financial POAs, right? Um, yeah, I think we've covered all the bases so far.
Okay,
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of information that I can talk about, but it's like more technical than it needs to be, you
sure.
know?
And that's why they need to contact you and
Yeah.
you can talk about that more.
Okay. So here's one thing, right? So
Okay.
lacking decision making capacity doesn't mean that you're necessarily unconscious.
Okay.
I think there's perhaps a misunderstanding there. Okay. So you can have a full blown conversation with somebody and that person still lacks decision making capacity. And we don't have to get into the technical details of what decision making capacity is, but it's made up of like 4 subcapacities, right? And you can lack one of them and not have decision making capacity. Like I've had full blown conversation with patients, like I'm like, they're friendly, I'm enjoying this conversation, and then I ask them what they understand about their medical condition, and then they say I don't know. And I was like, ooh, that's surprising. Yeah. So you can have, you're still, oftentimes you're still aware of what's going on, and you can even express preferences, but you may lack decision making capacity. Okay.
Okay.
I think so. I think that's important to know too.
Okay. All right. Well, Jason, it has been a pleasure having you on the podcast today. And this has been a really informative episode. And I think it's going to help a lot of people out there that didn't necessarily know that this service exists and is out there for them.
Well, I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So that does it today for the GSL Local Business Spotlight. Again, I'd like to thank Jason for being on the podcast today, and I wish you the best of luck with your business and with life. And
Thank you.
yeah, so thank you everybody for tuning in today. I really appreciate you watching and or listening to this episode, and hope to catch you next time on the GSL Local Business Spotlight. Take care. This episode of the GSL Local Business Spotlight is brought to you by Senior Care Authority, Central Ohio East. If you're trying to figure out senior care for a parent or loved one, you don't have to navigate it alone. Senior Care Authority, Central Ohio East helps families understand assisted living, memory care, elder care options, and the next steps that make sense for their situation. Brandon Boyd provides personalized, local guidance designed to bring clarity to a process that can feel overwhelming. Call Senior Care Authority, Central Ohio East today at 614-407-6459 or visit seniorcareauthority.com/locations/central-ohio-east to schedule your free consultation. And Stansberry Media and Strategy. If your business is posting content but still struggling to turn attention into actual growth, the problem may not be your effort. It may be your strategy. Stansberry Media and Strategy helps entrepreneurs and small businesses strengthen their positioning, messaging, content, and marketing systems so their brand gets seen, remembered, and chosen. If you're ready to stop guessing and start building with a clear plan, connect with Tiffany Stansberry and Stansberry Media and Strategy on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn today.